All right, so this will be our last lesson on this particular topical series. And again, a topical series is a little more dangerous because we look at various passages of Scripture and instead of just kind of planting ourselves in one. And so there's the opportunity for going on tangents. Maybe the Scripture doesn't go on. So I've been, so if I've done anything heretical, it's about to be over now. So I don't think I have. But these are important conversations. Speak now. So we've talked about singleness, right? I mean, it's just not something we as Christians talk about, but it's important to talk about. We talked about dating. I mean, what are the guidelines for dating? We talked about that. Last week we talked about marriage, and then today we're going to talk about faith and work. Faith and work. So all of us spend many more hours at work than we do at church or even at home with our families. Would you agree? And so, in fact, the economics website called FRED, Federal Reserve Economic Data, put out some data in 2013 showing that the average American works about 1,700 hours per year. And so what that tells us is that the only thing that we will do more in life than work is sleep. Okay? And it's sad but true that many Christians practice a dichotomy between their work and their faith. And so, there's a history to why this dichotomy exists in the church, but if we had to kind of summarize why the dichotomy exists, we could say that our pastors and our priests have encouraged, in my opinion, this dichotomy. We have not preached a theology of work. We have not communicated how or why work matters. We have adopted an ancient Greek philosophy of work and failed to communicate a truly Christian one. And as a result, there is this present dichotomy. And so in his book, The Other 6 Days, after Sunday, that's the title of the book, The Other 6 Days, Paul Stevens told the story of William Deal, a former executive at Bethlehem Steel, who's also a Christian. And Deal said, "In the almost 30 years of my professional career, my church has never once suggested that there be any type of accounting of my on-the-job ministry to others. My church has never once offered to improve those skills which could make me a better minister, nor has it ever asked if I needed any kind of support in what I was doing. There has never been an inquiry into the types of ethical decisions I must face or whether I seek to communicate my faith to my coworkers. I have never been in a congregation where there was any type of public affirmation of a ministry in my career. In short, I must conclude that my church doesn't have the least interest whether or how I minister in my daily work." And I think that's probably not an uncommon experience for Christians, okay? And so when the church and her leadership have little or nothing to say with what Christians do with 90% of their time, it's no wonder that some Christians have concluded that their faith and their work, there is no connection. There's a dichotomy. And so what I want to do in this, our last topical lesson, is discuss 4 things. I want to discuss real briefly, and I kind of have to go fast because there's so much I could say, but there's just not enough time. But 4 things here. The 4 modern perspectives on work. You'll probably find yourself attaching to one of them. Secondly, a brief biblical theology of work. We're going to be brief. Number 3, real life work stories, and then we're going to close with what I believe to be gospel-centered work. And so let's begin with the 4 modern perspectives on work. And again, it's likely that one of these perspectives you have held in the past, or maybe you hold right now. And so here they are, the 4 modern perspectives. Work as a necessary evil, work as an identity, work as making money, and then work as powerful self-preservation. Okay? And so let's just talk about each of those individually. Work as a necessary evil. In ancient times, in ancient Greek times, work was seen as a curse and nothing else, right? Work was an unmitigated evil to be avoided at all costs. Work was the endless cycle of activity forced upon us by the embodied existence. Has anyone ever felt that way about their work? The Greeks believed that the physical body was of a lower order, and that to graduate out of the embodied existence one day was the most that anyone could hope for. And so the ancient Greek gods were understood to be disembodied beings, and the best human life was one that longed for disembodiedness. And so what this manifested as over time is the idea that the only important work was the work of those who dealt with higher things like philosophers and priests. Okay? But this also manifested itself in the idea that to get to a place where you did not have to work was to truly have arrived in life. And so slavery in the ancient Greek world was partly fueled by this. To really arrive in life, so to get to a place where you don't have to work, so what do? You hire slaves who can work for you, and now you've arrived. So many people feel this way today. We have this idea that retirement is the goal of life. One day when I'm no longer working, then I've arrived, right? And so in the Middle Ages, the church would adopt this same understanding of work by exalting the work of monks, nuns, and priests, and considering the work of everyone else of no spiritual significance or meaning. And so an example would be Eusebius of Caesarea, who was a Greek historian of Christianity in the 3rd century. He said this. He said, two ways of life were given by the law of Christ to his church. The one is above nature and beyond common human living. It admits not marriage, childbearing, property, nor the possession of wealth, but wholly and permanently separate from the common customary life of mankind. It devotes itself to the service of God alone in its wealth of heavenly love. And they who enter on this course appear to die to the life of mortals, to bear with them nothing earthly but their body and mind and spirit, and to have passed to heaven. Such then is the perfect form of the Christian life. And the other, more humble, more human, permits men to join in pure nuptials and to produce children, to undertake government, to give orders to soldiers. It allows them to have minds for farming, for trade, and for the other more secular interests, as well as for religion. And it is for them that times of retreat and instruction and days of hearing sacred things are set apart. And a kind of secondary grade of piety is attributed to them, giving just such help as such lives require, and that all men have their part in the coming of salvation and profit by the teaching of the gospel. And so here's a 3rd century Christian scholar who kind of merged Christianity with Greek philosophy. There's a higher, second tier or first tier of Christianity, and then there's a second tier of Christianity or Christians, and those are the people that do not do the quote-unquote spiritual work. And so, so in that day, some work was holy and some work was unholy. There were the first-class citizens of the church and the second-class citizens. And the result of this broken and divided view of work was that the ordinary daily callings of ordinary Christians became second-class operations. Ministers, monks, nuns, lived the truly Christian life that God cared most about. Everyone else just worked to eat. Does that make sense? Okay. And so modern authors have rightly recognized the devastating consequences of this dichotomy. Let me just voice one of them. Paul Stevens, and here it is. Paul Stevens said, the idea that service to God should have only to do with a church altar, singing, reading, sacrifice, and the like is without a doubt but the worst trick of the devil. How could the devil have led us more effectively astray than by the narrow conception that service to God takes place only in church and by works done therein? The whole world could abound with services to the Lord, not only in churches, but also in the home, kitchen, workshop, field. Okay, and there are a number of authors today that are writing on this devastating dichotomy. So the first view of work that we have to wrestle with is work as a necessary evil. Okay, and this is again had devastating consequences in the church. The second view is work as an identity. Work as an identity. So during the Protestant Reformation, the 15th and 16th hundreds or so, the church came down hard on this unbiblical dichotomy of sacred and secular, and praise God for it. And so one Reformation commentator, wrote, "It is an ancient error that those who flee worldly affairs and engage in contemplation," talking about monks, "are leading an angelic life. We know that men were created to busy themselves with labor, and that no sacrifice is more pleasing to God than when each one attends to his calling and studies to live well for the common good." Okay. Another wrote, "There is no work better than another to please God. To pour water, to wash dishes, to be a cobbler or an apostle, all are one, as touching the deed to please God." So the Protestant Reformation, we kind of came down hard. That's not the biblical worldview. Okay, but over time, a new distortion arose in the Christian understanding of work. Work went beyond its rightful place as a means to love God by loving my neighbor, to become an identity, that I am what I do. And this was kind of the new idea that developed. And so we see this new idea, or new way of thinking about work, in the names that people later chose for their families. They basically said, our identity as a family is attached to this profession or station, and so let us choose a name accordingly. And so we have the Smiths, and the bakers, and the bishops, and the farmers, and the abbots, and the archers, and the hunters, and the fletchers, and the potters, and the shepherds, and the skinners, and the turners, and the weavers, and the wheelers, right? Those are all professions. Many people today, and we do this today. Many people today, if they suddenly could not work, would not know who they are, right? So much of corporate America today is driven by a quest to make a name for myself, to place my stake in the ground of human accomplishment and say, look what I've done. But if what you do is who you are, then what happens when you can no longer do what you do? Well, you need to remake your identity, or you go into some type of crisis, right? And so the first view of work we have to wrestle with is work as a necessary evil. The second is work as an identity. And so if work is a necessary evil, then work has no inherent value. But if work is my identity, then work has too much value. Make sense? Okay. And so the third view of work is work as a means to make money. So when the Industrial Revolution hit, work became about how we can mass produce the works of our hands to turn a profit. And so at this stage, what's really interesting is that work became very Darwinistic. So it's interesting that at the same time that Charles Darwin was promoting his theory of evolution in the world, work was taking on a new shape in the world as well. And what we find during the Industrial Revolution was work evolved into the strong eating the weak. The strong companies survived, the weak ones died, those who made the most won, those who didn't perished. Okay? And so when work became Darwinistic in behavior, because money became the drive of our work, people got used. And so what do we find developing not long after the Industrial Revolution took hold in America, early 1900s? Labor unions. Why? Because people are being used. We have child labor laws that the government institutes. Labor unions were necessary during that time. Okay? And so for the Christian, this is where we come kind of face to face with one of our idols of our time. So whenever money becomes the engine to any human activity, people get hurt. The love of money fueled the slave trade in the American colonies. The love of money fuels human trafficking today. Our Lyft driver in Chicago this week, Carl and I, told us that the methadone clinic he works at is primarily driven by money and is therefore not really helping anyone. Okay? The love of money drives many unjust and people-harming practices in the world, and the Christian must never view work this way. Okay? And so, Paul the Apostle was quite clear on the danger of this love of money. He said in 1 Timothy 6, "Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And so, this one's kind of, can be hard for the Christian to kind of get a hold of, because it's good and right that we should receive something from the work we do. Like if I give you something, it is right that you give me something in return of equal value. Because if you're in a relationship with anyone in which you're giving and they're not giving anything back, you feel used. Yeah. So it's right that there ought to be a reciprocity in both what we offer to serve, but also what we offer in product. It's right for payment. But it's wrong. It's wrong for us to do work simply for the sake of money. Whenever money becomes the engine of our work, we will hurt people. Our work must be motivated by something higher, some higher ideal. So think about it this way. If you go to work with a primary motivation to make money, this means that the people you serve while at work are simply a means to an end for you. Right? People are just your means of getting what you want. You don't actually care about them. You don't actually want to serve them. You're not really out for your good. They're good. You're out for your money in their pockets. Right? And so you're not there to serve them or honor them or meet their needs. You're there to get what you want. And so the first view of work is work as a necessary evil. The second, work as an identity. The third, work as a means to make money. And then the final view of work, and again, probably all of us have held these views, one of these views at some point. The third one, and maybe the most destructive, is work as powerful self-preservation. So many people today view work as our means of preserving ourselves. In fact, many people look at the bad things happening in the world today and they say, what we need to do is we need to buy a chunk of land away from civilization and live off the land and preserve ourselves alive while the rest of the world goes to pot. Right? And, so it's the National Geographic Doomsday Preppers. And so what encourages this idea is the many technological advances which make it possible for us to subdue the nature world under our feet. So Sigmund Freud once said, with the development of science and technology, humanity has begun to claim for itself the omniscience and omnipotence it had formerly reserved for divine beings. Each piece of technical equipment augments the native powers of the human body. The telescope extends the power of vision to the very distant. The microscope extends the power of vision to the very small. The telephone extends the range of the voice and the power of hearing. Television extends the range of the eye and the ear. With the aid of modern forms of technology, humanity has achieved an undreamt mastery over nature and has thus converted itself into a prosthetic god. Okay. Work, in this way, has furthered our confidence that we can be our own God. And so in this way, it's just a retelling of the Babel story. Right? Tower of Babel. People said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. So the people of Babel basically said, let us secure for ourselves and preserve ourselves forever. Let us make a tower that reaches to God and turns us into one. And if you recall, in that story, the one thing that gave them confidence that their project might actually be accomplishable was a technological advancement in brick making. Genesis 11:3 said, they said to each other, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. That was a new way of doing brick making. They could make it stronger and lighter. And so by breaking bricks, they found that they could, a new technological advancement. They found a way to preserve themselves. And God says, yeah, we're not doing that. And you know that story. So there they are. Those are the four modern perspectives on work. I think neither one of them is the biblical one. So then what is the biblical one? Let's discuss now a brief biblical theology of work. Here we are. Biblical. So how do we think about work as a... I mean, all of us are going to work tomorrow. Or we're doing some work, even if we're not getting paid for it, we're doing some productive activity, which is called work. And so how do we think about it as Christians? Well, I think the best way to do this is we really have to understand the overarching biblical story from Genesis to Revelation. If we just kind of pick a verse here and pick a verse there, that doesn't give us an overall span. So as we read this morning, Genesis 1 shows us that God himself, understand this, God himself is a worker. God works 6 days and rests on the seventh. And everything God works to create is good. God created the raw materials to work with, and then God created from those raw materials an ordered world, resulting in goodness. Okay? And so the ancient Greeks believed that work was for the under-earthly world only, but the biblical view is that God himself is a worker. Work, according to the Bible, is an activity of the divine. Work is what God does, and because it is what God does, when God creates mankind in his image, it becomes what mankind does as well. Okay? In this way, when God creates us in his image, he creates us to be workers. He creates us to share in his cultivation of the earth. So Genesis 1:28, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over the cattle, over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And so in this passage, God pauses with the first part of creation and he calls a huddle. Right? Father, son, huddle up, guys, let's do this. All right? And he says this. My words. All right. Now that we've created the earth just as we wanted it, let us make mankind in our image, and let us have them represent us and carry on our work on the earth. Let us delegate our authority to them in order that they may reflect our holy, loving care for creation. And so verse 28, God invites mankind to have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So I want us to note four important considerations here from Genesis. Four important considerations. Number one, that the dominion given to mankind is a delegated dominion. Okay. Mankind was... We have someone coming forward right now. Something. Mankind was not created to rule the earth in whatever way they want to. They have a delegated authority. They are not free to do with the earth whatever they want to do with the earth. Okay? Instead, they are to be co-workers with God. Did you know God's your co-worker? We are to be co-workers. God is a worker, and therefore part of what it means to be human is that we are to be workers too. Therefore, it is not the goal of human life to, as Zach Brown sings, stand knee-deep in the water somewhere with a blue sky breeze blowing wind through my hair. Only worry in the world is the tide going to reach my chair. Now, that's a good picture of a Sabbath. Okay, I want that. Okay, but that's not the picture of the goal of human life. Okay? The goal of human life is to be co-workers with God, both in cultivating the earth and in bringing his gospel to the end of the earth. So we're called to be co-workers with God, but the authority we have is a delegated authority. We only have authority over the earth because that authority has been given to us. Therefore, we are not free to do whatever we want to do with what God has given us dominion over. And if we would take this seriously as Christians, we probably wouldn't have the environmental problems we have. Okay? So, number one, the dominion given to mankind from Genesis 1 is a delegated dominion. Secondly, the things we create with the raw materials God gives us must be good. So when we read Genesis 1, we find that nothing in God's creation was created bad. In fact, everything got 5 stars, and then mankind got 6. Right? It was good, and then it was very good. Right? So, hey, alcohol's not bad. Drugs are not bad. Rap music is not bad. The internet is not bad. Nothing in creation is inherently bad, and nothing we create from the raw materials God has given us is inherently bad either. Things only become bad, as Carl was saying, when mankind abuses their authority as God's co-workers. So think about it. The world took a wild turn for the worst the second mankind took what God created and did something God said not to do with it. Eat it. Right? There was nothing bad about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the middle of the garden. In fact, we can imagine it was a perfectly good tree. But it became bad when mankind took their delegated authority and misused it. Okay? So, folks, the plant that produces opium is not a bad plant. But that plant becomes bad only when mankind abuses their authority and does with that plant that which God would not do. Okay? So mankind has a delegated authority. Mankind is called to work to create good things, even as even as a result of God's work was only good things. Okay? And then thirdly, mankind is given a gauge, an ethical gauge for what is good to create. So how do we know what is good to create? Well, good work, according to the Bible, is work that blesses mankind in a legitimate way. All of God's work on days 1 through 5 were called good because they would bring goodness to the lives of mankind. So what God made in days 1 through 5 were made with mankind in mind. The animals were called good because of the goodness they would bring to mankind. The stars were called good because of the goodness they would bring to mankind. The plants were called good because of the goodness they would bring to mankind. So, folks, mankind was the reason for God creating the earth. God envisioned a humanity much as an artist envisions a masterpiece and says, let us create them to share our love with them. And after that said, we can imagine, if we're going to share our love with them, we must create a place for them to live, so let's make it good. Amen. Like mankind was not the afterthought of, oh, now we need one more thing. What is that? No. It was he created the earth for us, for our good. And so, that's not a scripture in the Bible, but when we look at the overall entire biblical storyline, we see that's true. That has to be true. That's God's heart. Okay? So God created the world for our good in order that we would give him glory through it. And so God's own gauge for creating the world, God's own gauge for his own work was this: will it be good for the people I create? That's the gauge. Will it be good for the people I create? In the same way, since we are created in God's image, we must ask of everything that we put our hands to create, be it homes, be it lawnmowers, be it works of art, be it books, be it Medicaid applications, signs, diapers, cupcakes, security, cleaning services, whatever it is you put your hands to do, whatever we create, we must ask of them, what good does this bring mankind? Okay? That's the gauge that the Christian is to have for all human work. It is not whether the product or service will make you money. That's the gauge in America. If it makes you money, do it. That's not, no. For the Christian, does it bring legitimate good to the people that you live among and sell to? Okay. So I want you to know that even if you do not believe in God today, you sort of know this to be true. So you know that God's gauge of blessing humanity ought to be the gauge for everyone. You just kind of know that. You don't even believe in God, but you know that gauge ought to be everyone's gauge. Why? Because think about it. You know what it feels like to feel like your work contributes nothing to the good of humanity. You know what that feels like. Every working person, old or young, millennial or boomer baby, wants to feel as if their work contributes in some way to the global good. We want that. And if you've ever done work that you felt added no value to anyone, anyhow, you know how hard it was to do that job. I mean, you couldn't muster the energy. I hate this. Why am I doing this? There's no point. Even if you don't believe in God, you know that this gauge of God's ought to be the gauge of humanity, but you really have no grounding for believing that, except that that's your experience too. You know this is what ought to be, okay? So if you're a Christian today, though, this is good. You have a substantive, grounded reason as a Christian for wanting your work to contribute to the good of humanity. You want your work to contribute to the good of humanity because God created you to want that. God created the world for your good because He loved you, and now, because you're made in His image, you have a desire to create from the world good things too. But if you do not believe the Bible is true, then you have no reason for feeling the way you feel. Right? So if the world was not created for your good, but is instead an accident of cosmic energy, then why work for good?
That's right.
I mean, why not just take all you can from people?
That's right.
Right? Why not just do whatever you have to do to get the most you can before you die? Why care about anything but yourself if there really is nothing beyond yourself? And why is it so unsatisfying for you to be working a job that you feel like does no good? Well, you feel that way because even if you don't believe in God, God's imagedness in you is speaking back to you. Okay? All of us have a need to feel productive and contributory to society. And that is because God created us for that. And so the last thing I want us to see, the fourth thing here in Genesis, is that work was not a curse of the fall. Work was not a curse of the fall. Work was there from the beginning. So many people today believe that work is a curse and that heaven is heaven in part because there is no work. But that's not true. Okay? Because of the fall, because mankind sinned, and because mankind sins every day, work has thorns and thistles that make it hard and redundant and frustrating and at times downright unproductive. That is the nature of work in a fallen world, but work itself is not cursed. Work is good. And so, I have the pleasure of seeing people heal and change on a regular basis in my counseling office and at CR and right here at Water's Edge. I see that. But in between those testimonies of healing and change are marriages that do not get better. There are thorns and thistles of work because of the fall. Okay? There are families that break up, though I work hard to help them heal. These are thorns and thistles. This is the nature of work in a fallen world, right? There are people I hope would come to church and take their walk with Christ more seriously, but they disappear for a while or forever. This is the result of work is frustrating, okay? For mothers who work at home, there are children you tried to raise to follow Christ who end up connecting with the wrong friends and becoming addicted to drugs. It's not that your work was bad, it's that we live in a fallen world in which our work is frustrated by human sin, which includes our sin. Okay? And so, this shouldn't surprise the Christian. The non-Christian will struggle greatly and perhaps even become bitter at this reality. But the Christian understands this to be a permanent part of this world, but she has a hope of another world to come. Okay? The Christian does not lose hope, though work is hard. She does not give up, though no tangible good seems to come from her good work. Instead, she knows that one day God will restore all things to their original goodness, and so she remains hopeful. Okay. This, folks, is a very brief theology of work. Work is good. We were created to work because God Himself is a worker. It's our imagedness. Okay. And as God worked to create only good things, so we as workers must create only good things as well, only things that benefit humanity. And then lastly, the guide for our work in the world must be, again, for the welfare of humanity. What I want to do now is I want to show you some people who are putting their faith in Christ into practice in their workplace. And so we're going to hear from someone in another part of the country, and then we're going to hear from someone local to us.
Cardone Industries is a remanufacturer of automotive parts. We take parts from older vehicles, we take them apart, we clean them, reassemble them, test them, sell them at 30 to 50% less than a new part, and give them a lifetime warranty. This enables people to keep their cars longer. It helps them reduce the cost of the repairs of their vehicle, and it makes these component parts available to them through the independent aftermarket, through stores like AutoZone and Napa. The company has grown to where we employ over 5,000 people. We are the largest manufacturer in Pennsylvania. We're also the largest privately held remanufacturer in the world. We didn't start out with that objective. We didn't start out with a 5-year plan to do that. It's just been through hard work, the Lord's blessing, and being the best at what we do. We believe there's a bottom line business-wise, profit-wise. There's a bottom line socially, how you impact your community, how you impact the people around you, how you impact your vendors, how you impact your customers. I also believe, though, there's a spiritual bottom line.
We want to see people be successful in life, successful in work, and really have a balanced perspective on how they go about their life on a day in and day out basis. So we happen to believe that faith in Jesus Christ is the best way to get there. And we're not shy about talking about it, and we're not shy about bringing that to the workplace.
I believe to be a successful business, you have to always put the customer first. Well, we take it on into our business, and that means my employees are my customer. That's who I have to serve. And when I serve them well, I know they're going to serve my customers well.
When people are leading as servants, the people underneath them want to work for them. They're motivated, and they want to produce the financial results that we need to have in order to stay in business.
I believe that doing the right thing doesn't mean you have to compromise your results. I believe that will enhance your results. As an example, the whole country is dealing with the cost of health care. We found that our factory family members and their families were not getting timely health care and their quality of health care that they deserved. We developed a partnership with a local hospital to start our own clinic. It took a lot of effort on our part, and it took an investment on our part. But through that clinic, we've been able to manage our health care costs below the national average.
We were able to create the same level of service for a much lower cost to the employee, to the company. It's been a real win-win situation, and has allowed even more people to be on the healthcare program than were before. Whether it be through helping people here internally, whether it be through servicing customers the better than anybody else. Those are the things that I think gives us the platform to talk about Jesus Christ, to talk about God, and to show them we can honor God in everything we do, and we can still have a very successful, very profitable business in the automotive aftermarket.
Giving your life to God, giving your business to God, means that you're willing to accept what God has for you. It's not necessarily the size of your business. It's not necessarily the growth of your business. It's not how many competitors you put out of business. It's doing what God's called us to do. I believe if you do that, your business will be a success.
Our family feels called to provide jobs for people, and we see it as a ministry.
I'm not called to be a minister. I'm not called to be a pastor. I'm called to be a businessman. I see no difference. Work is worship.
Praise God. I've invited LaShonda to join me on stage. As many of you know, LaShonda owns her own business in town. And I want her to share with us her experience and how, particularly how her faith applies to her work. So LaShonda, come on. All right, so LaShonda, if you could just describe for us the work you do and how you got into the work you're in?
I am a pastry chef, is what you would call me. I was called at age 14 is when I fell in love with it. So I've been running ever since with it. And God spoke to me, being a single mom, and not really knowing what my next steps were in my baking career, and spoke to me that a business was going to come. So I got busy trying to plan that business, and kept him in the forefront the whole time, because I had no idea what I was going to do. But it took a lot of stepping out on faith. I was working for Hart's Turkey Farm for 6 years in a bad economy. And I said, God, if you really want me to do this, open up the door. And he did. And I left that job of $16 an hour with health benefits to be on state assistance. And from there, he just moved. He just helped me to get my website together. He helped me gain customers. I am now a preferred vendor in 7 very successful hotels, restaurants that use me quite often for that. I could have not done that on my own, but that was me stepping out on faith, just knowing that that's what God wanted for my life. So that was the first phase.
Praise God. So, Shaun, how does your faith in Christ influence both the people you work with and the actual work you do?
I would have to say, in the beginning of starting the business, I think I kept that faith to myself, but the more and more the business was growing, I definitely had a surrendering moment to give that over to God and for him to take that business and to do with it what he pleased. And he moved me into a shop just this past year. And because there's such a great need here in Laconia, I believe that my faith in him has definitely been contagious. With the people that work for me, I'm able to share my faith openly and to speak about how God has worked in my life, hear those situations, and kind of give them a different perspective. With God giving me that perspective to give to them. I've had customers come in to my shop, and it's kind of interesting, they don't even know why they're there. They think that they're getting a cupcake, they think that they're getting a cake, and some of these people I actually end up ministering to. So it's interesting to have seen as my faith grows more in him, and it's evolving, that how he's transforming people who are working for me and the customers that are coming into the shop and the community. So.
Praise God, thank you. One other question, Shaun, and I talked about that human work is impacted by the fall. There's brokenness in every workplace. And so how do you deal with the brokenness or fallenness of work? How have you dealt with that?
Oh man, that's hard. That has definitely, been a struggle. But I think, being in a Christian mindset and knowing God well enough to understand that we will have struggles and we will have disappointments because of the world that we're living in. That part I can't control. can't control that part. God has definitely been working with me, and I think it's always going to be a work in progress to make sure that my mind is kept on His goodness and His kingdom and the things to come, and just knowing that God is always good. He's always good. He doesn't want us to have a hardened heart in our work. He wants us to always have joy because he gifted us. He gifted us our hands to be able to do it. So I think always pulling on and remembering that goodness of God, and just understanding, well, God, I gave it my best here. You take it over and you do the rest. So there's always that surrendering when that comes up, because our human self, our natural selves, wants to lash out. We want revenge, or we want these things, but we do have to very much just step back and control ourselves in a sense of, we have to let God have that part. That piece we can't fix, and we'll never be able to change. But if we surrender it over, and we remember our purpose and remembering what God has done for us, that kind of keeps us in a state of moving forward and just knowing that God is going to work it all out.
Praise God. Thank you, Shaun. Let's give our room a applause. All right, so as we prepare to surround communion, what is gospel-centered work? What is gospel-centered work? Gospel-centered work is work that is driven by the gospel of Jesus Christ. Gospel-centered work has the human person at the center of our endeavors, because Jesus Christ had us at the center of his. Okay. Gospel-centered work is more concerned about how our work impacts others than how our work impacts ourselves, because Jesus was more concerned about us than he was for himself. Gospel-centered work loves people because they are people. It does not love people simply because they're useful to us, because Jesus loved us when we were not useful to him. Gospel-centered work shares in the profits of the company, because Jesus Christ shared his eternal profit with us. In fact, Jesus Christ gave up his eternal profit for us. Gospel-centered work is willing to go against the dominant culture in her lust for power, pride, and profit, all because Jesus was willing to go against the dominant culture to save us from our power, our pride, and our lust for profit. Gospel-centered workplaces are places where the gospel can be shared and experienced freely, where people are prayed for. Christian bosses consider their employees as their sheep to shepherd. Christian managers consider their work their foreign land to minister in. On and on we could go with how the gospel impacts every aspect of our city, and only if the gospel impacts every aspect of our city. Not if everybody comes to church.
Amen.
But if everybody leaves church and applies the gospel to every aspect of our city, then one day, I think, by God's grace, we can see Laconia, New Hampshire so alive with the gospel of Jesus. And our schools, our businesses, our families, and our churches radiate his love and truth into our region and beyond. And so let me ask you this as we surround communion here. Have you believed and obeyed that gospel yet? Where are you at with Jesus Christ? Is he the motivation for everything you do? Or has something else crept into your heart and led you astray and not led to, likely, the welfare of mankind? Where are you at with Jesus? What is your next step? Carol believed her next step was to be baptized. What is your next step? Is there anything you need to repent of? Is there any activity of work that you feel like you have not done well, or done to the welfare of mankind, done to the glory of God? What is your next step? Let me ask you to stand. We're going to read our communion passage. and then take communion together.